6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed ship Harmony's Dawn, watching as the massive vessel approached the crystal forests of Valdris Prime. Below them, the surface sparkled with structures that looked more like grown artworks than buildings, their flowing forms perfectly integrated with the natural landscape. Emma pressed her face against the transparent aluminum viewport, her breath fogging the surface as she pointed excitedly at the approaching world. "Look, Mommy! Drakmon's family is waiting for him." Through the viewing port, Sarah could see the creatures gathering in the great meadow that served as the ship's landing area. They were magnificent beings, similar to Drakmon but unscathed by the conditioning and torture that had marked her friend's life. Their hides gleamed with natural patterns of color that spoke of health and happiness, and their movements held the grace that Drakmon was slowly relearning. Behind them, the massive form of Drakmon himself stirred from where he had been resting in the ship's modified cargo bay. The space had been transformed from a prison into something resembling a natural habitat, complete with plants from his homeworld and the soft lighting that his species preferred. The scars on his hide had faded somewhat over the months of gentle care, and his eyes now held a peace that Sarah had never seen in the arena. "Nervous?" she asked, placing a gentle hand on his massive flank. The deep rumble that emerged from his throat was complex, layered with emotions that human ears could barely process. But through the empathic connection they shared, Sarah felt his answer clearly. Nervous, yes, but also excited, grateful, and most importantly, hopeful. Dr. Keithvar approached from across the bay, his movements still awkward, but noticeably more relaxed than they had been during his military service. He had been one of the first Zephyrians to volunteer for the new Galactic Rehabilitation Council, dedicating his scientific expertise to undoing the damage his people had caused. "The preliminary medical scans are complete," he reported, his tone warm with genuine satisfaction. "Drakmon's psychological profile shows no remaining traces of the aggressive conditioning. His natural behavioral patterns have reasserted themselves completely. And the others? Similar results across the board. The Syndrapack has already been successfully reintegrated with their families on Kethtar. The crystalline spiders have begun new art colonies on 7 different worlds. Even the Void Serpent has found its voice again, and is teaching the songs of its people to anyone willing to listen." The ship shuddered gently as it touched down on Valdris Prime's surface. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the native creatures approaching cautiously, their massive forms moving with the careful grace of beings who had learned to be afraid of ships like this one. But as Drakmon's scent reached them through the atmospheric processors, their posture changed completely. "Family," Emma said simply, recognizing the emotion that was flooding through the empathic field. "They know he's coming home." Commander Vexthul, now Director Vexthul of the Reparations Fleet, appeared at Sarah's shoulder. His transformation had been perhaps the most remarkable of all. Stripped of his military authority and forced to confront the true cost of his empire's actions, he had thrown himself into the work of making amends with a dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. "The Council has approved the final reparations package for Valdris Prime," he reported. "Full territorial sovereignty, protection from future interference, and a technology-sharing agreement that allows them to maintain contact with other worlds if they choose." And Chancellor Mordeth's response? "She remains resistant to the new paradigm. But the democratic uprising on Zephyr Prime has effectively removed her from power. The new civilian government is much more receptive to peaceful coexistence. It had taken months of careful negotiation, but the revelation that their empire was built on a foundation of unnecessary cruelty had sparked a revolution among the Zephyrian people themselves. The younger generation, especially those who had worked closely with human empaths, had begun questioning everything their society had taught them about strength, honor, and the right to rule. The cargo bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Valdris Prime's sweet, clean air flowed into the ship. Drakmon raised his massive head, nostrils flaring as he caught the sense of his homeworld for the first time in decades. The sound he made was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard from him, a mixture of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. "Go on," Emma encouraged, giving his flank an affectionate pat. "Your family is waiting." Drakmon moved slowly toward the open door, his steps careful and deliberate. As he emerged into the sunlight of his homeworld, the waiting creatures surged forward, their voices raised in harmonic calls that spoke of welcome, forgiveness, and love. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the empathic waves washed over her, carrying emotions too pure and powerful for words. Emma tugged at her mother's hand. "And can we visit him sometimes?" "I think that can be arranged," Sarah replied, wiping her eyes. The new Galactic Transit Authority is setting up regular diplomatic routes between all the former prison worlds. People should be able to visit their friends whenever they want. Through the doorway, they watched as Drakmon was surrounded by his people, their massive forms intertwining in greetings that spoke of bonds that even decades of separation couldn't break. Smaller creatures, obviously youngsters born during his absence, approached with the fearless curiosity of children everywhere, examining this scarred stranger who smelled like family but carried stories of unimaginable pain. Dr. Keithvar made a notation on his scanner, but Sarah noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "The readings are extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The level of acceptance, the immediate reintegration into the social structure, the complete absence of rejection or fear. It's beautiful." Director Vexithol nodded slowly. "This is what we destroyed when we took them from their homes. Not just individuals, but entire communities, entire cultures. The damage we caused can be healed," Sarah finished firmly. "It will take time and there will always be scars, but life finds a way to heal when it's given the chance." Emma had wandered over to the control panel and was pressing buttons that made different colored lights appear on the ship's communication system. Within moments, responses began coming in from across the galaxy. Ships full of freed prisoners were reporting successful homecomings on dozens of worlds. The Harmony's Dawn was just one of hundreds of vessels now dedicated to reuniting families and rebuilding broken communities. "Mommy, look," Emma called out, pointing to a message on the display. "It's from Marcus. He says the robot people are building new bodies for the ones that got broken, and they're making them even better than before." Sarah smiled as she read the message from the engineer who had been on their ship during the uprising. The mechanical beings from Siberian had not only welcomed their returning children but had used the experience to develop new forms of cooperative consciousness that bridged the gap between organic and artificial intelligence. Another message appeared, this one from Grace, the elderly woman who had sung lullabies to predators. She was now living on a world called Haven's Rest, where refugee creatures from various worlds were learning to live together in a new kind of community that celebrated diversity instead of fearing it. "The human empathic gift," Dr. Kithvar mused, watching the stream of positive reports. "We thought it was just an unusual biological trait. We never realized it was the key to everything we had lost in our pursuit of dominance." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Connection, understanding, the ability to see past surface differences to the fundamental truth that all consciousness, regardless of its form, shares the same basic needs: safety, belonging, purpose, love." He paused, studying his scanner readings. "Your species doesn't just feel empathy. You teach it. You show others how to rediscover their own capacity for compassion." Outside, Drakmon had settled into the meadow with his family gathered around him. The youngest creatures had climbed onto his back, examining his scars with the gentle curiosity of healers. Sarah could feel their primitive attempts at empathy, their instinctive desire to ease his pain and welcome him back into the community. It's not just humans, she realized suddenly. Every species has this capacity. The Zephyrians just convinced everyone, including themselves, that it was weakness. Emma looked up from the communication panel, her 5-year-old wisdom shining in her eyes. "That's silly," she announced. "Being nice to people is the strongest thing you can do. It makes everyone happy, and happy people do amazing things." As if to prove her point, the meadow below erupted in a display of natural artistry as Drakmon's family began showing off their abilities. Creatures that had been forced to use their gifts for destruction were now creating beauty beyond imagination. Light flowers bloomed in impossible colors. Musical harmonies filled the air, and the very ground itself began to shift into patterns that spoke of joy and celebration. Director Vex Thul touched a control that opened all the ship's communication channels. "This is the Harmony's Dawn to all vessels in the reparations fleet. Mission accomplished. Drakmon is home." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices from across the galaxy, representing dozens of species, both former. High Chancellor Mordeth stared at the transmission from the arena, her ancient mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. In her 2 centuries of life, She had conquered 14 star systems, enslaved 43 species, and built the Zephyrian Empire into the most feared force in the galaxy. She had seen civilizations burn and planets reduced to ash, but she had never seen anything like this. A human child, no taller than a Zephyrian's forearm, was conducting what could only be described as an interspecies orchestra. Creatures from dozens of worlds were gathered around her, their natural abilities combining in ways that defied everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about biology and behavior. The crystalline spider was creating light, patterns that corresponded to the harmonies being sung by flying creatures whose voices could shatter steel. The massive turtle being was growing flowers that bloomed in rhythm with the music, their pollens releasing scents that seemed to calm even the most aggressive predators. At the center of it all, Drachmon lay peacefully, his massive bulk serving as both stage and protection for the small human who had somehow unraveled centuries of conditioning with nothing more than kindness. "This is impossible," Chancellor Mordeth said finally. These creatures were broken. Their will was destroyed. They exist only to serve the Empire. Sarah stepped forward, still keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder. "With respect, Chancellor, I think that's where you made your mistake. You didn't break them. You just convinced them there was no point in being themselves. But humans, we've always believed that anyone can change, that everyone deserves a second chance." Dr. Kithvar appeared beside Commander Vexthul, his scanner still recording impossible readings. "Chancellor, the data supports the humans' assertion. These creatures weren't actually broken, merely suppressed. The human empathic field is acting as a catalyst, allowing their original personality matrices to reassert themselves." "And what are the implications of this discovery?" the Chancellor asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "Total systemic failure of our control mechanisms across the fleet," Vexthul reported grimly. 17 ships have already lost containment. The war beasts are not only refusing to fight, they're actively protecting their former prisoners. Some vessels are reporting collaborative efforts between species we've kept isolated for decades. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Then we destroy them all. Every creature, every human, every ship that has been contaminated by this anomaly." "Begging your pardon, Chancellor," said a new voice from the communication channel. It was Captain Dextar from the battleship Conquest of Worlds. "But that may not be possible." "Explain." "Ma'am, the humans have done something to our war beasts that we didn't anticipate. They've made them smart. Not just individually, but collectively. The creatures are communicating across species barriers, sharing information and coordinating their actions. They've turned our own ships into protective sanctuaries." On the screen, Emma had climbed up onto Drachmon's back and was addressing the communication pickup directly. Her 5-year-old voice carried the absolute moral authority that only children possess. "You should stop being mean to everyone," she announced. "Being mean makes you sad inside even if you pretend it doesn't. All your animals want to go home to their families. Why don't you just let them?" The simplicity of the question hit the Zephyrian leadership like a thunderbolt. In all their strategic planning, all their conquest protocols, they had never once considered that their weapons might simply want to go home. Sarah picked up where her daughter left off. "Emma's right. Every creature you've enslaved has a homeworld, a family, a natural place in the universe. You've been using them as tools for conquest, but what if instead you help them return to where they belong?" "Impossible," Chancellor Mordeth snapped. "The Empire requires their service. Without our war beasts, we cannot maintain order across our territories." "What if you didn't need to maintain order through fear?" Sarah asked gently. "What if there was another way?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the arena, the assembled creatures had gone quiet, as if waiting for the answer. Even the ship's systems seemed to hum more softly, as if the technology itself was listening. Dr. Kithvar stepped forward hesitantly. "Chancellor, I've been analyzing the data from our interactions with the humans. Their empathic abilities aren't just affecting the war beasts, they're affecting us too. I've been feeling things that I've never experienced before." "What kind of things?" "Regret, curiosity about other ways of living, a desire to understand rather than simply dominate." He paused, his voice becoming uncertain. "Is it possible that our entire civilization has been wrong?" The question sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian command structure. Their society was built on the absolute certainty that they were superior, that conquest was not just necessary but morally correct. The idea that they might have been mistaken about something so fundamental was almost incomprehensible. Emma, oblivious to the philosophical crisis she was causing among the alien leadership, had begun teaching some of the smaller creatures a clapping game. The sight of a massive predator carefully trying to match the rhythm of a human child's hands was both absurd and deeply moving. "Look at them," Sarah said softly. "Look how happy they are when they're allowed to just be themselves. Your war beasts aren't weapons. They're individuals with their own personalities, their own talents, their own dreams. You could have had allies instead of slaves, partners instead of prisoners." Captain Dextar's voice crackled through the comm again. "Chancellor, I'm receiving reports from across the fleet. The humans are sharing something called culture with the war beasts. Stories, songs, games, art. The creatures are responding by sharing their own cultural expressions. We're seeing creativity and beauty that we never knew existed. And the result? The result is that they don't want to fight anymore. Not for us, not for anyone. They want to build, to create, to explore. The humans have reminded them of who they used to be before we broke them." Chancellor Mordeth was quiet for a long moment, her ancient mind processing implications that stretched far beyond this single incident. Her empire controlled hundreds of worlds, enslaved dozens of species, maintained order through fear and brutality. If the humans could undo that conditioning, if they could awaken the suppressed spirits of their victims. "What do you propose, human?" she asked finally. Sarah looked around the arena, at the peaceful gathering of creatures who had been mortal enemies just hours before, at her daughter who was now fast asleep curled up against Drakmon's protective bulk. "I propose we find out what the galaxy looks like when everyone is free to be their best selves instead of their most fearsome," she said. "I propose we discover what happens when we choose cooperation over conquest, understanding over domination, love over fear. And if we refuse?" Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Then you'll learn what happens when humans get angry. Because we're very good at helping others find their strength, Chancellor. And right now, we're surrounded by several thousand very large, very intelligent, very grateful former prisoners who remember exactly what you did to them." The implication was clear. The Zephyrian Empire had a choice: evolve or face the consequences of their actions from every species they had wronged. The revolution would be peaceful, if they were wise enough to let it. The ship shuddered as something massive struck the hull from within. Emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors as containment breach alerts flooded the Zephyrian command systems. What had started as a simple execution had become a full-scale uprising, and it was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Commander Vexthul stood in his command center, watching his perfectly ordered world collapse on dozens of monitoring screens. Creatures that had been docile for decades were tearing through reinforced barriers like tissue paper. The neural suppression systems that had kept them under control were failing across the entire ship. "Status report." He barked at his communications officer. "Cell blocks 7 through 15 have been compromised, sir. The ice bear has freed itself and is systematically destroying the containment systems for other specimens. The Syndra pack has reformed and is exhibiting coordinated hunting behavior. The Void Serpent has awakened from its induced hibernation and is..." "Sir, it's singing." "Singing?" "A harmonic frequency that's causing structural damage to the ship's internal framework. And sir, the other prisoners are responding to it. The human captives in Block C they're singing back." Vexthul's compound eyes went wide with disbelief. "Show me." The main screen flickered to life, displaying a corridor where 36 human prisoners had gathered despite the chaos around them. They were singing an old Earth song, something about amazing grace, their voices joining together in harmonies that seemed to resonate through the ship's metal bones. As they sang, the Void Serpent's alien melody wove between their human harmonies, creating something new, something that had never existed before. Dr. Keithvar burst into the command center, his scanner and several portable research devices clutched in his forearms. "Commander, I've made a discovery. The humans aren't just empathic, they're catalytic empaths. They don't just feel what others feel, they amplify and transform emotional states." "Explain." "Quickly. Think of them as emotional prisms, sir. They take complex feelings and break them down into their purest components. Fear becomes courage. Despair becomes hope. Rage becomes determination. They're literally rewiring the psychological conditioning of every creature they interact with. On the arena floor, Emma had awakened from her nap to find herself surrounded by a growing circle of freed war beasts. Each one approached cautiously, drawn by the same mysterious force that had calmed Drakmon. A crystalline spider creature from the mineral worlds of Vega crept forward on legs like living diamonds, its multiple eyes reflecting Emma's image like a kaleidoscope. "Hi there," Emma said cheerfully, reaching out to pat one of its faceted legs. "You're really pretty. Like a walking jewel." The creature's response was immediate and startling. Its body began to glow with soft, warm light, colors flowing through its crystalline structure like liquid rainbows. Sarah realized this was probably the first time in years that the creature had been called beautiful instead of fearsome. More beasts emerged from the destroyed holding cells. A massive turtle-like creature with a shell covered in living moss approached slowly, leaving a trail of small flowers in its wake. Flying creatures with gossamer wings descended from the arena's upper reaches, their song calls harmonizing with the ongoing human choir echoing through the ship. "It's incredible," Sarah whispered, watching as Emma fearlessly greeted each new arrival. "They're not war beasts at all. They're artists, gardeners, singers, builders. The Zephyrians took creatures designed for beauty and creation and tried to turn them into weapons." Dr. Kithvar's scanner confirmed her observations. "The neural patterns are stabilizing into configurations we've never seen. These aren't the simplified aggression responses we programmed. They're complex, multifaceted consciousness patterns indicating advanced intelligence and emotional sophistication." "Commander," Vexthal watched his empire's greatest weapons transforming into something else entirely right before his eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "We were wrong. About everything, sir. We assumed that because we could break them, they were weak. Because we could control them, they were inferior. But we never actually defeated them. We just buried who they really were." The truth was spreading through the ship like wildfire. In the human prison blocks, people were sharing stories and memories with creatures they had been taught to fear. A young engineer named Marcus was showing a mechanical being from the robot worlds how to repair damage to its own systems, with care, instead of just brutal efficiency. An elderly woman named Grace was singing lullabies to a massive predator from the dark worlds, helping it remember the songs its own mother had once sung. Each interaction created new connections, new understanding. The human's natural empathy was acting like a universal translator for emotions, helping beings from completely different evolutionary paths find common ground in their shared experiences of loss, separation, and hope. "Commander," the communications officer reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving surrender requests from 17 other ships in the fleet. The effect is spreading through quantum communication channels. Every vessel with both human prisoners and war beasts is reporting similar incidents." Vexthal staggered backward as if struck. Their entire military strategy was based on the controlled use of enslaved predators. If that control was breaking down across the fleet, "Sir," incoming transmission from the Hierarchy Council. The screen filled with the image of High Chancellor Mordeth, the supreme leader of the Zephyrian Empire. Her ancient scarred carapace marked her as a veteran of countless wars. But now her compound eyes showed something Vexthal had never seen before. Fear. "Commander Vexthal, explain to me how a simple execution has resulted in the largest military disaster in our empire's history." Before Vexthal could respond, a new voice cut through the transmission. It was Sarah speaking from the arena floor where she stood surrounded by dozens of freed creatures and her daughter. Somehow she had accessed the ship's communication system. "Honorable Chancellor," Sarah said, her tone respectful but firm, "I believe I can answer that question. Your empire built its power on a fundamental misunderstanding of what strength really means." The Chancellor's image turned toward the pickup, her alien features unreadable. "Human, you speak out of turn. You are a prisoner, nothing more." "I'm a mother," Sarah replied simply, "and a scientist. And right now I'm standing in the middle of proof that your entire philosophy is wrong. True strength isn't about domination or control. It's about connection, understanding, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other." Emma looked up from where she was braiding flowers into the mossy shell of the turtle creature. "The bug people forgot how to be friends," she announced with the absolute certainty of childhood. "But everyone wants to be friends. Even scary things just want someone to be nice to them." Around the arena, Dozens of the galaxy's most feared predators rumbled their agreement with a 5-year-old human's simple wisdom. The sound echoed through the ship, through the quantum channels and out into space where other vessels were learning the same impossible lesson. The age of the Zephyrian Empire was ending. The age of something new was about to begin. Dr. Kithavar's scanner chirped frantically as readings cascaded across its display, each one more impossible than the last. The empathic resonance wasn't stopping with Drachmon. Energy signatures from the holding cells around the arena showed that every war beast in the facility was responding to whatever was happening on the arena floor. "Commander, we have a situation," Dr. Kithavar said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The resonance effect is spreading. 37 other specimens are showing similar neural pattern shifts, stress hormones dropping, aggression indicators falling to baseline levels we've never recorded." Vexthol's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "That's impossible. Each beast was conditioned independently. There's no connection between them." "Apparently there is, sir. Something about the humans is triggering a response that transcends our conditioning protocols." Down in the arena, Emma had settled herself comfortably against Drachmon's massive side, using the creature as a living backrest while she chatted away. The beast's attention was completely focused on her, occasionally rumbling responses to her questions as if it understood every word. "Do you have a family?" Emma asked, patting the scarred hide beside her. "I bet you do. Everyone has a family somewhere. Mine is just me and Mommy and Daddy, but Daddy isn't here right now. The bug people took us away from him." At the mention of family, something shifted in Drachmon's eyes. A deep mournful sound emerged from its throat, different from the contented rumbling it had been making. Sarah, who had been a xenobiologist before her capture, recognized the sound immediately. It was grief. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These creatures hadn't been bred in laboratories as she had assumed. They had been taken from their families, stolen from their worlds just like she and Emma had been. The scars covering Drachmon's hide weren't just from battles. They were from the conditioning process, from the breaking of its will and the destruction of its natural instincts. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "They're not weapons. They're prisoners." Dr. Kithavar's scanner detected the spike in Sarah's emotional state and cross-referenced it with Drachmon's responding neural patterns. "Commander, the female human's distress is causing corresponding reactions in the beast. Whatever connection exists between them, it's bidirectional." Emma seemed to sense the change in mood as well. She turned and wrapped her small arms around as much of Drachmon's massive neck as she could reach. "It's okay," she murmured in the same soothing tone Sarah used when Emma had nightmares. "You miss them, don't you?" "I miss my daddy too, but missing someone just means you love them a lot." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Drachmon's entire body shuddered and tears, actual tears, began to leak from its 4 massive eyes. The sound it made was no longer just grief, but something deeper, more profound. It was the sound of a soul that had been buried under years of forced conditioning, finally being allowed to feel again. Around the arena, similar sounds echoed from the holding cells. Roars of rage were transforming into cries of anguish. The war beasts were remembering what they had lost, what had been taken from them. The carefully constructed psychological barriers that kept them obedient were crumbling in the face of simple human compassion. "Emergency protocols," Vexthol shrieked into his communicator. "Lock down all containment cells. Increase sedation levels to maximum. We cannot lose control of the specimens." But it was too late. In Cell Block 7, a creature called Thexmor, a massive bear-like being from the ice world of Valeria, had heard Drachmon's cries of recognition and was responding in kind. The neural dampeners that kept it docile were failing as its natural emotional responses reasserted themselves. In Cell Block 12, the Syndra Pack, wolf-like hunters from the forest moon of Kethtar, began howling in harmony. They had been separated from their pack bonds during capture, their social instincts suppressed through chemical intervention. Now those bonds were reforming, creating a network of shared consciousness that was spreading throughout the facility. Dr. Kithavar watched his readings in growing horror. "Sir, containment breaches are beginning across multiple sectors. The beasts are breaking free of their psychological conditioning. Some are starting to show signs of organized behavior." "How is this possible?" Vexthol demanded. "We've controlled these creatures for centuries. Our methods are proven. Our methods relied on isolation and suppression of emotional responses, Dr. Kithavar explained frantically. But humans appear to be natural empaths. They're reactivating the very neural pathways we worked so hard to suppress. Emma had fallen asleep against Drachmon's side, exhausted by the stress of the day. The massive creature had curled protectively around her, creating a living fortress of scarred hide and ancient scars. One massive eye remained open, watching the guards who still surrounded them at a respectful distance. Sarah sat beside her daughter, one hand resting on Emma's back and the other touching Drachmon's flank. She could feel the creature's heartbeat through its thick hide, steady and strong. More importantly, she could sense something else, something that her scientific training told her should be impossible. She was feeling Drachmon's memories. They came in flashes, fragmentary images that leaked through whatever connection had formed between them. She saw a world of purple skies and crystal forests, where creatures like Drachmon lived in family groups, raising their young in harmony with their environment. She saw the day the Zephyrian ships arrived, the terror as families were torn apart, the anguish of being ripped away from everything familiar and safe. She saw the conditioning centers, where natural behaviors were punished with pain until they disappeared entirely. She saw the forced battles, where captured creatures were made to fight each other for the entertainment of their captors. She saw years of isolation, of being treated as nothing more than a living weapon. But she also saw something else, something that made her heart race with hope. She saw that beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the pain and forced aggression, the essential nature of these creatures remained intact. They could still love. They could still remember. They could still choose. The connection works both ways, she said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly in the relative quiet of the arena. Emma's showing them how to feel again, but they're showing us something too. Dr. Kithavar's scanner picked up her words and transmitted them to the command booth. What is the human saying? What are they showing you? Sarah looked up at the observation windows where she could see the alien figures watching her. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried an undertone of steel that made several guards take involuntary steps backward. They're showing me that you haven't broken them. Not really. You've just taught them to hide who they really are. But humans are very good at recognizing kindness even when it's buried deep. And once kindness recognizes kindness, she gestured around the arena, where the sounds from the holding cells were growing louder and more organized. Well, I think you're about to find out what happens next. As if summoned by her words, a new sound echoed through the facility. It was Drachmon's voice, but raised in something that was unmistakably a call. And from all across the ship, dozens of other voices answered, each one unique but carrying the same message. The prisoners were waking up, and they were very, very angry. The silence in the arena was deafening. Thousands of Zephyrian warriors bred for conquest and raised on stories of Drachmon's legendary ferocity sat in stunned disbelief as their ultimate weapon behaved like a domesticated pet. The creature that had torn apart battle cruisers with its bare claws was now lying on its belly, allowing a human child to scratch behind what passed for its ears. Emma had climbed up onto Drachmon's massive head, her small hands exploring the ridges and scars that marked the creature's ancient battles. She chattered away in the fearless manner of children, completely oblivious to the impossibility of her situation. You have really pretty eyes, she told the beast, patting one of its massive optical organs. They're like big green marbles. Do you like games? I know lots of games we could play. Drachmon's tail continued its slow rhythmic wagging, occasionally scraping against the arena wall with a sound like grinding stone. The creature's breathing had settled into a deep, contented rumble that seemed to vibrate through the entire structure. Sarah remained frozen in place, afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever spell was keeping her daughter safe. Commander Vexthol's voice erupted from the speakers, no longer the calm, controlled tone of a superior being, but the high-pitched shriek of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling. Security teams to the arena. Subdue the beast. This is impossible. Drachmon has never shown mercy to any species. Check the neural implants. Check the feeding schedule. Something is wrong. Armed guards began pouring through side entrances, their weapons raised but their movements hesitant. None of them seemed eager to get close to Drachmon, even in its current peaceful state. The creature's reputation was too fearsome, its history too bloody, for anyone to believe this gentleness would last. But as the guards approached, Drachmon's demeanor shifted subtly. The deep rumbling took on a warning tone, and its massive head lifted slightly, one eye tracking the approaching soldiers while the other three remained focused on Emma. The message was clear. The child was under its protection. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Emma, sweetheart, come down from there slowly. But Mommy, he likes me. Look, he's smiling." Sarah looked more closely and realized Emma was right. The creature's mouth was slightly open in what could only be described as a smile, its massive tongue lolling out slightly. It looked absurdly like an enormous, scarred dog enjoying a belly rub. Dr. HFY, the Zephyrian chief xenobiologist, appeared in the command booth beside Commander Vexthul. His forearms worked frantically over a portable scanner, trying to make sense of the readings he was getting from the arena floor. His compound eyes were wide with shock and scientific fascination. "Commander, the biorhythmic readings are unprecedented. Drachmon's stress hormones have dropped to levels we've never recorded. Its neural activity patterns suggest not just calmness but actual pleasure. This violates everything we know about the creature's psychological conditioning." "Then explain it." Vexthul roared. "That beast has killed everything we've ever put in this arena. It once ate an entire squadron of Krathan battle mechs. It devoured the great champions of Zirion. Why does it not kill these humans?" Dr. HFY continued his scans, his scientific mind racing to find explanations for the impossible. Perhaps there's something about human biochemistry that we've overlooked. Some pheromone or chemical signature that triggers a different response in Drachmon's neural pathways. Down in the arena, more guards had arrived, forming a loose circle around the peaceful scene. Their energy weapons hummed with charge, but none dared fire while the human child was so close to the beast. Emma had discovered that scratching a particular spot behind Drachmon's massive jaw caused the creature to lean into her touch and rumble even louder. "Good boy," she cooed, completely unaware of the chaos she was causing. "You're such a good boy. Are you lonely? I bet you're lonely. Mommy says that mean people are usually just sad and lonely inside." Sarah's heart ached at her daughter's words. Even in this impossible situation, Emma's innocent compassion shone through. The child saw past the scars and the reputation to something that might have been broken inside the creature. As if responding to Emma's words, Drachmon carefully turned its head and gently nuzzled Sarah's hand with its massive snout. The touch was surprisingly warm and soft, and Sarah could feel the creature's pulse through the thick hide. It was looking at her now with what seemed to be intelligence, as if trying to communicate something beyond words. "Commander," Dr. HFY's voice carried a note of excitement mixed with terror. "I'm detecting something extraordinary. The beast's neural patterns are synchronizing with the humans. There's some form of empathic resonance occurring that we've never documented in any species interaction." The revelation sent a shockwave through the Zephyrian command. Empathic resonance was theoretical at best, a concept that their cold, logical society had always dismissed as impossible. They viewed emotions as weaknesses to be exploited, not bridges to be built. But the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, impossibly, a human child had reached across the vast gulf between species and touched something deep within their ultimate weapon. The creature that had been engineered for nothing but destruction had found something it had never known before. Genuine affection offered without fear or agenda. Emma slid down from Drachmon's head and walked around to face the creature directly. She placed her small hands on either side of its massive snout and looked into its ancient eyes. "You don't want to hurt anybody, do you?" she asked softly. "You're just doing what the mean bug people tell you to do because you don't know any better. But you're not mean inside. I can tell." Drachmon's response was to gently lower its head until it rested on the arena floor in front of Emma, a gesture of submission that sent another wave of shocked chatter through the Zephyrian audience. The God Killer, the World Eater, the ultimate predator bred from the genetics of 100 worlds, was bowing to a 5-year-old human child. Commander Vexthul's voice cut through the chaos, cold and deadly. "Enough. If the beast will not kill them, then we will kill them all. Prepare the plasma cannons. Reduce the entire arena to ash." But even as the command was given, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Around the arena, she could see other creatures stirring and holding cells she hadn't noticed before. The sound of Drachmon's contentment seemed to be affecting them too, and their growls and roars were taking on a different quality. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the backs of enslaved predators, each one broken and controlled through pain and conditioning. But now, for the first time, one of their weapons had remembered what it meant to be shown kindness. and that knowledge was spreading. The ground beneath Sarah's feet trembled as something enormous approached through the tunnel. Dust and small stones rained down from the arena ceiling as thunderous footsteps grew louder. Emma pressed her face against Sarah's leg, tiny hands clutching at her mother's torn jumpsuit. "Mommy, something big is coming," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring crowd. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, trying to keep her own terror from showing. "I know, baby. Just stay close to me, okay?" The metal gate at the tunnel entrance began to rise with a grinding shriek of ancient machinery. Darkness yawned beyond it like the mouth of some primordial nightmare. For a moment, nothing emerged except the overwhelming stench of old blood and something else, something wild and predatory that made every instinct in Sarah's body scream at her to run. Then Dracmon stepped into the light. The creature was beyond anything Sarah had imagined in her worst nightmares. Standing nearly 15 feet tall at the shoulder, it resembled a massive fusion of reptile and mammal, covered in thick, scarred hide that looked like living armor. 6 powerful legs, each ending in claws the size of swords, supported its bulk. Its head was enormous, longer than Sarah was tall, filled with rows of teeth like broken glass. 4 eyes, each the size of dinner plates, swiveled independently as they scanned the arena. But it was more than just size that made Dracmon terrifying. The creature radiated an aura of intelligent malevolence that seemed to press against Sarah's mind like a physical weight. This was not some mindless beast, but a thinking predator that enjoyed the hunt as much as the kill. The Zephyrian crowd fell silent in reverent awe. Even their excited chittering died away as Dracmon emerged fully into the arena. Commander Vexthul's voice rang out over the speakers, thick with pride and anticipation. "Behold Dracmon, the God-Killer, the World-Eater, bred from the fiercest predators of 100 worlds, enhanced with the finest genetic modifications our science can provide. It has consumed the champions of 30 species, devoured the war leaders of the Krathan Empire, and torn apart the battle mechs of the Synthetic Coalition. Today it feeds upon the flesh of humans." Dracmon's massive head turned toward Sarah and Emma, all 4 eyes focusing on them with laser-like intensity. The creature's nostrils flared as it took in their scent, and a low rumble emerged from its throat that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's bones. Slowly, deliberately, it began to move toward them. Sarah's military training from her years in the Colonial Defense Force kicked in. She couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't fight, but she could die protecting her daughter. She gently pushed Emma behind her and spread her arms wide, making herself the larger target. "Stay behind Mommy, Emma. No matter what happens, don't run. Just stay right there." "Okay, Mommy, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky." Dracmon was 20 feet away now, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace. Sarah could see old scars crisscrossing its hide, evidence of countless battles. Some looked like claw marks from other predators. Others appeared to be burns from energy weapons. This creature had fought armies and won 15 feet. The creature's breathing was loud and rhythmic like a steam engine. Saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling when it hit the arena floor. The Zephyrians leaned forward in their seats, anticipating the spectacular violence to come. 10 feet. Sarah could smell the creature's breath now, hot and reeking of decay. She closed her eyes and thought of her husband, David, hoping he would somehow know how much she loved him, how sorry she was that they would never see each other again. 5 feet. Dracmon stopped. Sarah opened her eyes, confused by the sudden lack of movement. The creature stood motionless, its massive head tilted to one side as if listening to something only it could hear. Its 4 eyes were still fixed on her and Emma, but something had changed in their expression. The predatory hunger was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like confusion? The silence stretched on. The Zephyrian audience began to stir restlessly, their clicks and buzzes taking on a questioning tone. Commander Vexthul's voice crackled over the speakers, sharp with irritation. "Dracmon! Feed! Devour the humans!" The creature's head swiveled toward the command booth where Vexthul stood. For a moment its eyes blazed with something that might have been defiance. Then it turned back to Sarah and Emma, taking another step forward. 2 feet away now, close enough that Sarah could have reached out and touched the creature's massive snout. Its breath washed over her in hot waves, and she could see her own reflection in its dinner plate eyes. This was it. This was how it ended. But instead of striking, Dracmon did something unprecedented. It lowered its enormous head until it was level with Sarah's, close enough that she could count every scar on its snout. Then slowly and carefully it extended its neck and gently sniffed at Emma. Emma, who had been hiding behind Sarah's legs, peered around her mother's hip. When she saw the massive creature's face so close to her own, she did something that made Sarah's heart stop. She giggled. "Mommy, look. He's like a really big puppy." The arena erupted in chaos. Zephyrians leaped to their feet, their calm composure shattered by this impossible development. Drachmon, the ultimate predator, the god killer, was nuzzling a human child like a gentle pet. The creature's tail, thick as a tree trunk and armed with spikes, began to wag slowly back and forth. Commander Vexthul's voice rose to a shriek over the speakers. "Attack! Kill them!" "Why do you not feed?" But Drachmon ignored the commands completely. Instead, the massive creature carefully lowered itself to the arena floor, bringing its head down to Emma's level. The little girl, showing no fear at all, reached out and patted the creature's scarred snout. "Good boy," she said in the same tone she might use with a friendly dog. "You're not scary at all, are you?" Drachmon's rumbling changed, becoming something almost like a purr. Sarah stared in absolute shock as the most dangerous predator in the known galaxy closed its eyes and leaned into her 5-year-old daughter's gentle touch. Sarah Chen gripped her 5-year-old daughter Emma's hand tighter as the massive alien guards dragged them through the crystalline corridors of the Zephyrian command ship. The walls pulsed with a sickly green light that made Emma whimper and press closer to her mother's leg. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay calm. Emma needed her to be strong. The Zephyrians were tall insectoid creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds. Their chitinous exoskeletons clicked and scraped as they moved, creating an unsettling symphony that echoed through the ship's halls. Commander Vexthul led the procession, his ceremonial armor adorned with the bones of conquered species. Sarah had learned enough of their language during her 3 months of captivity to understand the death sentences they casually discussed. 3 months ago, Sarah had been a xenobiologist on the research station Harmony 7, studying alien plant life on the edge of human space. Emma had been with her during what was supposed to be a routine family visit. Then the Zephyrians had arrived without warning, their ships blotting out the station's artificial sun. The attack had been swift and brutal. Most of the station's population had been killed immediately. But Sarah and Emma had been among the few dozen humans taken alive. The Zephyrians were conquerors by nature, driven by an ancient biological imperative to dominate and consume other species. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, with all other life forms existing only to serve their empire or provide entertainment through suffering. Humans, they had decided, were particularly amusing because of their emotional bonds and protective instincts. During their captivity, Sarah had watched in horror as other prisoners were subjected to various forms of torture and experimentation. The Zephyrians studied their victims' breaking points with scientific precision, documenting how different species reacted to pain, fear, and loss. They seemed especially fascinated by the way humans cried and begged for mercy, behaviors that were foreign to their own cold, logical society. Sarah had tried to shield Emma from the worst of it, creating games and stories to distract her daughter during the long, frightening days. She told Emma they were on a space adventure, that the scary bug people were just pretending to be mean and that Daddy would come rescue them soon. But Sarah knew the truth. The human fleet was too far away, and even if they came, the Zephyrians' technology was far superior. No rescue was coming. The procession stopped before a massive set of doors carved with scenes of battles and conquest. Commander Vexthul turned to face Sarah, his mandibles clicking in what she had learned was amusement. When he spoke, his voice was a series of harsh buzzes and clicks, but the translation device implanted in Sarah's ear converted it to flat, emotionless English. "Today, human female, you and your offspring will provide great honor to our war beast. Drachmon has not fed in 7 cycles and grows restless. Your deaths will satisfy his hunger and demonstrate to our young warriors the fate of those who resist the Zephyrian Empire." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had heard whispers about Drachmon from other prisoners, though none who had seen the creature had lived to describe it. The guards spoke of it in reverent tones, calling it the perfect weapon, the ultimate predator bred and trained for warfare. It was said to be the size of a small shuttle, with claws that could tear through battle armor and jaws powerful enough to crush starship hulls. Emma tugged on Sarah's hand, looking up with wide, trusting eyes. "Mommy, why does the bug man sound angry?" Are we in trouble? Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma into a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. Mommy just needs you to be very brave, okay? Can you do that for me? Emma nodded solemnly. I can be brave like the princess in the story. That's right, baby. Just like the princess. The doors ground open with a sound like thunder, revealing an enormous arena carved from black stone. Tiered seating rose up on all sides, filled with hundreds of Zephyrian spectators who buzzed and clicked with anticipation. The arena floor was stained with the blood of countless victims, and bones littered the sand in ghastly piles. At the far end, a gate of twisted metal bars blocked off a tunnel that descended into darkness. The guards prodded Sarah and Emma forward with electrified prods, forcing them to stumble into the arena. The doors slammed shut behind them with a finality that made Sarah's stomach drop. They were trapped. Commander Vexthul's voice boomed through speakers hidden in the arena walls. Behold, warriors of the Empire. Today we witness the feeding of Drachmon, blessed destroyer, bane of 1,000 worlds. Let these humans serve as reminder that all who oppose us shall be devoured. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of excited chittering and clicking. Some began a rhythmic chanting that sounded like breaking glass. Sarah pulled Emma close, positioning herself between her daughter and the dark tunnel, where something massive was beginning to stir. Deep rumbles echoed from the tunnel, followed by the scrape of enormous claws against stone. Whatever was coming was big and it was hungry. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to any god who might be listening. If this was how it ended, at least they would face it together,